somebody tell me the name of the person we were studying last month?
Joseph.
Joseph. And so our series is called Knowing God's People. We're looking at 4 big figures in the Old Testament, and we're looking at their lives and studying their stories, and we're looking at their characteristics and what is it that set them apart as faithful followers of God. That's our goal. And so last month, January, we studied Joseph. This month, February, we're going to study Moses. And so a little backdrop on our entire series, why we're doing this. You may have seen movies like Exodus recently, or back when you were a kid, you saw Prince of Egypt. Those kind of stories, those are good movies. They're biblical, they have biblical undertones, and they may be based on the story of the Bible. But when we open up God's Word and we read the stories of people like Joseph and Moses, we're not just reading like a fairy tale. And I think when we sit down and we think about that, and we think about these little stories that we learned when we were kids, we think of them as just like little fun fantasy stories that our parents or our Sunday school teacher taught us. When in reality, these things are history. They're historical events with real people and real happenings, and we tend to not think of it that way. And so I challenge you as we sit down and we hear the story of Moses, even though you may have heard it a bazillion times in Sunday school or wherever else in your home, I challenge you to remove all prior biases and to just look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and listen to it with a fresh set of ears. And let it hit your heart in a way that it may not have done so before. So kind of remove what you know already and pretend like you don't know anything. Because that's what I had to do this morning when I set out to learn about Moses. I wanted to give it straight up. And so Moses, the story of Moses starts about 400 years after the conclusion of the story of Joseph. And so we looked at Joseph. Joseph, in the big line of things, is the great-grandson of Abraham. So it went Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Joseph's story, Jacob's whole family, the Israelites, the Hebrews, come to Egypt and they're reunited. Joseph forgives his brothers. Awesome story. They live together in peace in Egypt. Well, 400 years later, you can probably guess what happened within that family. A lot of babies were had. The family of Jacob grew immensely. Ton of people, ton of Hebrews in Egypt. And so the new Pharaoh, 400-year later Pharaoh, he looked upon the people of Egypt and he saw the uprising of the Hebrews and he started to get worried naturally. And he said, man, these people that we allowed in, they're starting to multiply. I mean, I don't know who this Joseph guy was. I think I need to do something about this problem. So what he does is he enslaves the Hebrew people and he puts them in bondage and makes them work as Egypt's slaves. And so they go from a position of freedom to a position of enslavement over the course of that 400 years. And so, additionally, the Pharaoh said, I'm going to do one more thing to make sure that people stop growing. He said, every male that is born into a Hebrew family should be killed, either cast into the river or exterminated however else you choose to exterminate them. So he chose to cut the problem at its root and say no more dudes. So there's no more dudes, there's no more babies. But this is where our story picks up. There's a boy born into a Hebrew family by the name of Moses. And what Moses' mother did when Moses was a baby, she took her baby boy to the river and put him in the river. And lo and behold, whom else would pick up baby Moses than Pharaoh's own daughter? God delivers Moses from the dangers of Pharaoh's decree by the hands of his own daughter. And so Moses is picked up by Pharaoh's daughter and taken in as one of her own. And so Moses is raised up in the Egyptian culture. He learns how to walk like an Egyptian, and he learns how to talk like an Egyptian and do all the stuff that Egyptians did at the time. He actually lives in that culture for about 40 years. The cool thing about Moses is that his life lasted exactly 120 years. And his life is kind of like sectioned off into 3 different 40-year periods. And so the first one is Moses living as an Egyptian in Egypt. And so one day, Moses, when he was about 40, he goes out and walks outside his little Egyptian house and goes and decides to walk around Egypt and tour the kingdom. And so he's touring it, and while he's walking around, he sees some slaves working hard, and he sees a certain Egyptian slave driver driving the slaves really hard. In fact, Moses started to get angry because the slave driver was going a little bit too hard. And so what he did was he struck down the slave driver and killed him. And so Moses, in a fit of anger, murders this slave driver, buries the dude right there, and he's like, crap, that was in front of everybody. So Moses is probably freaking out a little bit, for good reason. Because the next day he goes out, and he's talking to some more of the slaves, the Hebrews, and one of them makes a sarcastic remark to him. He's like, what, are you going to kill me too, Moses? And Moses is like, dang, the word's getting out. I got to get out of here. People are going to hear about this. Pharaoh might even hear about this, and he might want me killed. And so Moses sets out to leave Egypt, and he leaves Egypt and goes to a place by the name of Midian. And as fate would have it, Moses is walking down the road to Midian, far away place from Egypt, and he comes upon this well, this watering hole where people get water from, and there's a group of women there. And along with this group of women comes a group of men who are like shepherds, and apparently their moms never taught them how to respect women because they start messing with them. And so Moses steps in and kind of diffuses the situation and saves these women from these men. And so the father of these women, whose name was Jethro, the first redneck in the Bible, Jethro hears about this and offers Moses his daughter. Says, you can marry my daughter. You can come live in my house. Little did Jethro know that Moses just killed a dude in Egypt. You just gave your daughter to a murderer. So you don't really think about that very much. But so Moses comes and he lives in Jethro's house. He marries Jethro's daughter named Zipporah. They have a bunch of babies. Moses living large in Midian. And he's loving his life. And he's like, man, the past is behind me and I'm doing my thing. This is the good life. And so this is the second section of Moses' life. Moses' time in Midian. And so while Moses is in Midian, you know, he's walking out in the fields of Midian, the beautiful green grass. I don't know if that was there or not. And all of a sudden, he's just by himself, just minding his own business, when this bush just bursts into flames. And Moses is like, what? But that bush doesn't burn down. It just keeps on burning. The fire just keeps going. And Moses is like, did I eat something weird for breakfast? Because that bush is just like burning. And the next thing that happens really causes him to question his sanity, because he hears a voice. And that voice is the voice of God. The Bible tells us that God came to Moses and gave Moses a message. He says, Moses, I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt, and I want you to go and rescue them from their bondage. I want you to go to Pharaoh and be the one to rescue my people. I'm the God of your father Abraham, your father Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Tell them the God of the Israelites is going to set his people free. And you can probably understand what was going through Moses' head. He was probably a little bit scared because the bush was talking to him. A little freaky, doesn't happen every day. But he was also probably scared because he left Egypt because he was a murderer. He didn't want to go back there. He was scared that he might have to finally pay his due as a murderer. He was also questioning God. He said, God, why would you use me? Like, I can't even talk right. I have a stutter. I don't even know what's going on. But God says, no, I'll speak through you. Better yet, I'll give you your boy Aaron, your friend, to come and help you. I'll give you Aaron as a helper. But Moses is still like, yeah, but we can't do it, God. It's like just us, and there's like 2 million Hebrews, and how are we going to do it? But finally, Moses makes up his mind to follow the Lord's instruction, and he packs up his family, and they leave Jethro's house, and they set on the trail back to Egypt. And so when they get back to Egypt, Aaron joins up with Moses, and they go to Pharaoh, and they deliver the message to Pharaoh. And you can probably guess Pharaoh's response. He's like, are you kidding me? I'm the God of this land. The God of the Hebrews, who's that? These are my people, and they're going to stay mine. And Moses is like, that's a bad idea, dude, because God said that we're going to bring some plagues to you. And so, if you've heard this story before, you know that God, in his power, brought 10 plagues upon the people of Egypt. Is there anybody in here that can name the 10 plagues in order? I know I can't, so I got a list. So, the first plague that God brings upon Egypt is that all the water in the kingdom turned to blood. So like, all the rivers, all the lakes, everything, even like the Nestle Pure Life water bottles were filled with blood. It was insane. But was Pharaoh convinced? No, he's like, I don't believe you. So next what happens is he sends frogs. So the entire kingdom is overrun with frogs. They're like jumping off people's heads, and just like people are sleeping and they're just sleeping on their faces. Is nasty. But is Pharaoh convinced? Nope. The next thing that happens is gnats come and overrun the entire kingdom. Have you ever like had a bunch of gnats in your face? Imagine that times a bazillion. Like you probably couldn't even breathe and gnats would fly in your mouth. Get a lot of protein. So next, not just gnats, flies, big gnats came and were bothering the kingdom. But do you think Pharaoh was convinced? No, he still was not convinced. So next, all of the livestock in Egypt died. So all the cows, all the horses, all the pigs, all the whatever Egyptians farmed, maybe squirrels, they all died. They were dead cold. The next thing that happened was boils came upon them. Y'all know what boils are? Has anyone here ever had a boil? Don't raise your hand. I wouldn't want to embarrass you like that. I've never had one, but they're nasty. You get a little thing on there and you like can cut it and it like ooze out, but imagine having them all over your body. It's pretty nasty. Everybody in the kingdom had that. But Pharaoh was still like, I'm not going to let them go. They're my people. So God amps it up just a little bit and brings a hailstorm down on Egypt. And the hailstorm had hailstones so big that they would crush a dude if it landed on him. And so Moses told all the Israelites, was like, hey, stay indoors tonight. It's going to get bad. And so the people that were left outside got hailed on and they died. The crops got hailed on and they died. But did Pharaoh care? No. His heart was hardened, the Bible says. So up next, locusts descended upon Egypt. If you thought flies were bad, locusts are just really loud and annoying and will eat basically anything they come across. So they were overrun with locusts. But did that change Pharaoh's mind? No. Time and time again. So, of course, God amps it up a little bit. He brings darkness upon the country of Egypt. So like imagine if we turned all the lights off and just completely walled up the place. It was absolutely dark. That's the way it was in Egypt for 3 days straight. Not a single ray of sunshine was upon Egypt. But did that change Pharaoh's mind? No, it did not. So lastly, the 10th plague, God came to Moses and he said, hey, you're going to want to tell all my people to slaughter a lamb and take the blood and put it over their doorpost, because the angel of death is coming, and he's going to pass over every house that has the blood of the lamb over its doorpost. And every firstborn son of every family that doesn't have the blood of the lamb on their doorpost is going to die. And lo and behold, it happened. In the middle of the night, the angel of death comes, and every Egyptian firstborn son in the entire country dies. Now, do you think that got Pharaoh's attention? It did. Finally.